Amazing. All right. What are we doing on time? Oh, sweet. Yeah, kind of pointing at us. Right? Put it over there if you want. And give a little bit more wide berth. I love it. There's always new faces. Old people who are bothering to show up.
Father, we're not going to open that door.
No, because it's noisy out there. The magic butter machines are working. They're not that kind of magic, but they are that kind of magic butter machine. We actually use those for our herbal extraction. So most of our medicine we make with that. We like those guys. It's good.
Hold up, bud.
No.
That's not helpful.
No?
No, it's not. Definitely.
We're good. Hey, y'all. I'm Bob. Oh, I hear more people coming in. That's all right. Welcome. And Renee's my other half running around there.
I'll go ahead if you want, because I know that
you want to do that one? Yeah. All right. It's all you, girl.
So lots and lots and lots of new faces. And so I will do the introduction. So all the people who know us, sorry, because you have to hear this. I apologize. So
resist playing with him.
I won't. I'll go sit and play with them.
No, he's a
So my name is Renee, and this is Bob, and we are the owners of this clinic in the traditional School of Herbal Studies, and we've both been herbalists for 1 million years, and we would really love for all of you to be herbalists so that you can take care of yourself and each other and the family. And so we do these community outreaches, and we try to let you know about other things that are going on in the community as well as our things. And the reason why we do these free classes is for exactly that reason, so that we're making sure that all of you are able to care for yourself properly. So one of the things we do is we just list a bunch of upcoming things, both free and not, both ours and in the community. If you ever want to know, just go to our calendar that's either on our website or sometimes on Facebook. The other thing is brand new we have a YouTube channel. So every time that we record or do anything that we are just giving out or we think that's relevant for the public, that we put it on there for you to see. And so it's important to be able to go there. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't toggle any cookies or weirdness to you, and you won't be spammed from it. So just knowing that we have a YouTube channel. It also has a blooper reel on it, which is amazing because it's Bob and I basically like yelling at each other in a really good fun way. Because I left the mic on during one of our things that we did, and it's pretty funny. I eat a bug at some point accidentally, and you get to hear it. So that's funny. So what's coming up quickly, because we're going to erase all of this, if you want to take a picture of it. What's coming up soon is the herbal first aid, and definitely not free, super fun, intensive. That's going to be everything from out in the woods to what you should have as your medicine cabinet, herbal first aid. We also talk about animals and at risk. So it's going to be like children, animals, very sick elders. And so that's fun. We'll get a little bit crazier in that than we normally do in our herbal first aid, because both Bob and I have taught survival skills type of classes, and we haven't done it in a really long time. And I used to do zombie apocalypse ones, and it's fun. So we might even go so far as to do like making stretchers from what's out and like carrying people back that are heavier than you. April 12th is an herb school open house, and all that is just a free event with the garden and the plant singing machine and just like everything we have to offer and some food, just to kind of get the community in and out and unafraid of walking into a crazy new place and like feeling like they're good that they're here.
And especially thinking about it, not really sure it's not going to come in and just kind of quiz us. You know, a lot of times you get Kendall rather than us when you're asking questions. So it's a chance to like, what are the textbooks? What's the difference between Western and Chinese?
I was going to say the other thing is that we always have our textbooks out, and nobody ever gets us solid and together so that we can actually speak to you. It's always in a large group scenario. And so this is just definitely one of the times where you can ask us anything, all the way from traditional healing. I'm trained Amazonian and some Cherokee. And so everything from traditional healing to clinical scope and sequence and practice. And so it's a good time to come and talk. I literally lean back in a chair and spin around and stuff, and you can ask me anything. So that's a good time to do it. The Green Thumb Festival is something that's been going on for 35 40 years plus, something like that. And it's the largest plant sale and the most diverse plant sale in the state of Florida. And so please, please, please come to that. And we happen to be there, but as a community whole, it's a yes. They give away stuff. They have, like, these are indigenous trees of Florida. Please go plant them. And they're either for sale or free. And it's always very limited because they're trying to encourage indigenous growth. And just it's a really nice way to see who's in your community and the diversity in the community, all the way from growers and permaculture to people like us. And so that's coming up, and it's local. One of the most important things is the Saturday Herb Day. We have the biggest herb day in Florida, if not the Eastern Seaboard, and it's all free and it's all fun and it's all spectacular. And what we do for that is line up vendors up and down the sidewalks and teaching tents. We have the whole interior open with weird herbal food and plant sales and music and drinks. And our students teach, and they're here in both programs. The students will be here, and it's just a yes day. And you can come and go as you please. And lots of people just walk up on the streets and have no idea who we are and sit in one of the classes because they're like that. It's open air tent. You sit your ass down. And it's good. Super fun. You can come whenever you are ready to and leave when you want to and run and get food. But it's just something that has been a community outreach for a really long time, and we love doing it. There's a raffle and giveaway. You can see your local Herbalists Without Borders. You can see your local American Herbalist Guild chapter. And those are the people that are in your community other than us. So we're all very tangled, and it's a nice thing to know, to be tangled up with a group that's environmentally thoughtful and in that realm. As we go forward, the Western Program 1-on-1, that's a one weekend class that really anybody should have. That's about keeping you out of the Walgreens and the CVS. So before we had ibuprofen and cough medicine and all the things we run immediately to the Walgreens for, that this is what we would have done. And I can remember when there wasn't a drugstore. There used to be a drugstore called Eckerd's Drugs. That was like the first thing. I can consciously remember an Eckerd's being put into my town. And me being like, what is this cool store? And it had candy and stuff. And so it's like a funny thing that really everybody should do that. But it's also the gateway drug to the rest of our classes. So that it's the one that gives you the very, very basics. You'll leave with 35 plants as a medica and how to use them and prepare them, like the basic dosing and preparation of infusion, decoction, tincture, like what those words even mean, some gardening practices, several herb walks, and just the basic of like, if you've never had me ever again, then you would absolutely be able to function with this. And that's a good thing. And then the secondary one in this month, we run these several times a year because they're feeder classes for some of our other programs that are dependent upon time. So when I have you in a clinical practice, I need you to be ready to go by each January. And so this would be one of the things you needed to get in before the January. So it's just everybody should take it type of class.
And it's not a program, but a lot of people don't like to wait for November. So it's a great way to kind of get your feet wet. And usually Renee will teach them, even though she's the primary instructor for them.
And well, we've done, sorry. Because I'm going to say something about this. Another thing that goes with that, because Bob said it's not required for the Chinese program, and there's at least 2 of you in here that have even been present or have done the class that are with us. We run intern clinics so that our students intern in here and other students from other colleges and schools intern in here. And the question I get always from the other schools, they'll run out for their medicine to try to make their medicine and be like, well, I don't know how much I'm supposed to be dosing, or I don't know how to write up to a normal person how to do this. So for me, not as a Chinese herbalist, to be able to explain to the doctors or the Chinese herbalists how to actually prepare and dose their medicine properly and store it properly and how to write that for the program means that for the patient means that they're not getting that in school, because it's the very most basic thing I give to the layman who's not going to be an herbalist. And that's probably because they assume they're going to just take a capsule off the counter. And we really very much want you to own your food and your medicine and be able to get it like off the ground or get it raw and understand what that is. And so that's something that's a factor in that. So even though it's not a requirement, the amount of lip service I give to Chinese night, and one of them was my kid. And I'm like, dude, you know how to do that. Go in there and make that up the way it's supposed to be, because the capsule wasn't there. And so it's just something to think about, because it's really just the same thing as going to a cooking class. It just happens to be medicinal herbs that you're in, and it's explaining how to properly do that. So you wouldn't boil an onion and expect it to be yummy. And so you need someone to be like, no, we need to saute it. And so.
But one thing that I put one on the share, the American Herbal Guild is the professional organization for herbalists. It's their 30th anniversary. So the 30th Symposium Conference. It's going to be in the Northeast. We don't know if we're teaching there yet. We'll probably be teaching there.
We're probably both. They haven't announced yet, but we've been asking for it.
Although it's very much geared towards clinicians, people of all experiences go to that one without a doubt. And, always look on one. It's a great way to, like, if you got like a bunch of our books out there, you're going to get to meet all of the authors because they're there speaking.
Real quick on that note, just so you know, because it really is the way to get. It's a very small community in the nation, herbalist in a general sense. And yeah, Bob's trying to encourage you to take a picture if you'd like to think about that. It's going to that conference. One, lots of people from here do that because we're one of the biggest schools on the Eastern Seaboard, so there's a lot of herbalists in this area. But two, it's everybody from somebody who loves plants, who wants to spiritually sit in the woods and meditate with them, to doctors and nurses and LMPs and professionals. So it's a whole mix of classes, and you get to be in that and see where you fall in all of that. And it's just a way to connect with your community. Again, a very, very small community in the nation even. We know everybody. So it's something that's fun. And ask us if you have questions about that. Any questions?
We just said it was for the symposium?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where is it?
That one, it moves all over to make it accessible. So this time it's in Maryland. And they like everybody from their ride shares, and there's camping available, and there's all kinds of work study programs. And Bob has been on and off the governing board type of for that. And definitely gear all of our classes so that you could eventually become registered herbalist. The thing is, there's a lot of community going, and that's why I said that, because like again, ride share, camp together, take care of each other. And as we move towards that date, we'll send out notices that say, like, shout out who's going, and you can kind of like post ride needs and shelter needs. And go early now to try to get on the work trade or anything like
fills up fast.
And Nidra, like say that it's real, like because we're friends. Like, you know, Bob sits on the RH board. It's on the card.
There's like
Yeah,
all the information. You'll be able to find all the information on the website. Yeah,
Anytime
that's basically
they'll
they'll do.
let us know, and we'll do our best to get you there. If it's finding stopping you, let us kind of like mouthpiece for you or name drop for sure.
So it's funny. We just taught this class in Atlanta for the Georgia chapter of the American Herbalist Guild. Was that just last weekend?
It was.
Oh, God. Except we did it over 8 hours as opposed to 2. So I'm going to talk really fast. No, I'm just kidding. We'll get the important parts of it all. So it was probably almost 25 years ago when I ran away to acupuncture school that ultimately I wanted to be an herbalist, not an acupuncturist, but I was happy to have the license. And what I found is there was a huge fear, and both from the general public as well as the medical community, about the use of herbs, especially Chinese herbs, because that's just, we use funny words and things like that. And so there was a lot of misinformation. There was a lot of fear around it. And ultimately, I knew that if I wanted to work as an herbalist, I darn sure better learn the pharmacology enough to be safe with my patients, but also I wanted to make sure I educated people about herb-drug interactions to start to demystify the plant some and really talk about what's the foundation of all of this. And the reality is, if you talk to a lot of herbalists, they're going to say herbs are safe, they're natural, you can eat them with anything, and that's a lie. You know, herbs are generally safe. You know, your things you put in a salad are safe most of the time, but there's issues sometimes with it. And, you know, we also hear from a lot of the herbalists, drugs are bad. And I would say, no, drugs are good. They save people's lives every day. And so sometimes they're overprescribed. Sometimes they're allowing people to not take care of themselves in order to use those. But we also get from the medical community sometimes where herbs are unregulated, they're dangerous, don't take those. That's not true either, because we're actually regulated by the FDA almost to the level of pharmaceutical drugs. Not quite, but almost. And so the reality is somewhere in the middle lies the truth. And that's kind of what I want to look at, is some of the real risk factors that are associated with it, some of the issues of quality control, and really kind of point out that it's generally okay.
You don't have to be fearful so long as you've got some basic tenets. And most people just go, just there's no one in the store, it must be good. And the reality is that's not always true either. Yeah.
So there's two things that I want to say about this. That people really underestimate how much food and herbs are actual medicine. And by saying that, one of my specialties is cancer care, generally 4-stage, and I had a 4-stage cancer care client who I've used chamomile to stop a major crisis, to give you an idea of what the possibilities are. But then the secondary thing, because of working with all of these doctors that have to do with cancer, U.S. oncology department, Moffitt, several of the, like John Hopkins, several of the biggies, all of the doctors that say to you, no, stop everything that you're doing, just don't do anything, it's because they don't know. So when I go to Mayo, my doctors and the people who are conferring me will say, well, what do you think about that? And if I can give them a couple of pages of research that says this, I'm like, all right, let's go ahead and do that. So it's really about them saying they don't know and stay away from it. And we have this fear-based thought processes in these schools, like the naturopath schools. It's the same concept. Well, let's just tell you all the ones that cause problems, and then we'll all be safe and just don't worry about it. And that's just plain and simple not true. When you're on some kind of regimen, too much tail can cause chemo to go bad, for real. And so it's something that, like, they're not telling you to stop the hot dogs and the whiskey, for real. They're not. They're saying anything. You can have Snickers, you can have drinks, you can have chicken wings, but please don't do that chamomile. And so it's just a ridiculous thing. And so when doctors do this, it's the shelf volume on both the acid and the toxins that are very normal. The second thing, I just want to tell you guys. The second thing is that we have to assume that 100%, including us, like the rifles, 100% of us are on pharmaceuticals, because lots of the over-counter stuff that we take for granted, like heartburn medicine, used to be regulated in pharmaceutical 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 10 years ago, and all the new people coming out and walking into the Walgreens and grabbing something like a Prilux or Nexium off the counter doesn't realize that 20 years ago you were only supposed to take that for 2 weeks max and never again because of the consequence. And that hasn't changed. And now they're selling it to the general public, and it will be in small writing that you don't read. And so it's something that we just have to naturally assume that this is going on. And so it's a good thing just to get very adjusted to this is all of the tools in your toolbox. And here's the safety that we would use for all of them. And
we're going to have to make you stand over here so that they can hear you.
I know, but I'm not on this camera either, but my mouth is big enough that it's not you saying that.
No, they couldn't hear you.
All right, and so that was all. I just don't want you to ever have the fear base that we have for our practitioners coming in and be able to, like, navigate that world in a good, healthy way.
There's a couple of things I always like to talk about. When we say the word herb-drug interactions, everybody goes, ooh, herb-drug interactions are bad. I'm here to also tell you, and I hope that we have enough time to talk about it, herb-drug interactions are good. And so I want to change the way we think about it in our languaging sometimes. And some of it's not an herb technically, but I think you'll get the idea. If you take an antibiotic, there's an increased risk of digestive upset, irritable bowel syndrome, yeast infection. So what do? We take a probiotic. And that's a positive interaction. And the research backs that up now. And we're finding a lot of doctors, a lot of walk-in clinics, and even hospitals are saying, hey, go get a probiotic and you'll prevent some illnesses with that. So, like, that's great that, like, everybody's getting on board and the research is backing it up. And there's some even crazier things that we can do that are super positive. One of the problems, and I know we have some medical professionals in here, both the herbal alternative medicine side as well as the traditional or the dominant medicine side. And so the greatest problem that we have as herbalists, as acupuncturists, is our languaging. So within Chinese medicine, we have we say this is a blood mover. So that actually doesn't necessarily mean that it thins the blood. It's not Coumadin that we're using. It's a concept that's kind of unique to Chinese medicine. So some of our blood movers thin the blood and change the coagulation time in some times, and some don't. And there's a little bit of research out there. And herbs that we don't even say are blood movers actually do change clotting time. So part of what we have to do as alternative herbalists, as medical practitioners, we have to actually learn that, there's a heck of a lot more MDs, a lot more pharmacists out there. And so we need to learn their language and be able to say with the research to say, what does this do to the clotting time? How does this affect the body? So that becomes really important. The other issue is
Spelling this right. And see.
And so DSHEA is something that's been enacted now for over 20 years. It's Dietary Safety Health Education Act, something like that. I don't know. Congress passed that a while back. And basically what that told us, and it applies to everybody. It applies to me here in this clinic. It applies to every herbal manufacturer, every supplement manufacturer. And it says, you got to say what's in the label, and it better be in there, and you better have the right point size, and it better be safe. You better not be sneaking stuff in. There better not be any pharmaceuticals. And so not only does this clearly how we have to make our medicine, but it also gave the FDA enforcement ability. So they can arrest you now if you don't do it. They can fine you. And prior to about 2000, they could yell at you and they could threaten you, but they really couldn't do a whole heck of a lot. CGMP is also the good manufacturing practices, and this tells us how we test our herbs to make sure that our herbs are safe. And so they're both interrelated. This one is more about labeling and how we sell our products. This is more about how we harvest and make our products. And it's kind of the same rules that they have for the pharmaceutical industry. They're way more stringent as far as testing, but like we have to keep samples. We have to go through a testing process. All of those things have to be done. We have a little bit more latitude in how it shows up. We have marker compounds. They're not vital that we ensure that those meet a certain level. And it's always interesting. I would say quality control is a huge issue for the herbal industry. Guess what? Quality control is a huge issue for this pharmaceutical industry. I follow that industry as best I can because I need to know what drugs people are taking, what they do, and what issues there are out there. And what we're finding is most of our pharmaceutical drugs are made outside the US. In all the places that we say, oh, don't get that if don't get your herbs if they come from China. Well, guess where your pharmaceutical drugs are coming from? The same place. They're coming from India, they're coming from China, they're coming from Mexico. Those are all the places where we're able to get our medicine a little bit cheaper. And technically those are FDA inspected labs, which most of our herbal manufacturers are FDA inspected factories as well. Yes. The problem is they were probably inspected 20 years ago. And maybe if you're lucky, they went ahead and did it again 5 years, 6 years ago. And anywhere along that line of manufacture, both for pharmaceuticals as well as herbs, that can be messed with. And guess what? There's counterfeit out there. And most pharmaceuticals come from very legit places that there isn't an issue. But there's kind of like those drugs that aren't used a lot. They cost a lot of money. They're harder to source. Some of the chemotherapy, some of the rare diseases, there's specialized drugs that are used for those. So I'll show you all the stuff. I only brought a few of them with me. We have a wall of. These are the most, I feel like I'm forgetting one, but these are the most common ones that are adulterated. Like, you should be suspicious. Just because you read it on the internet or you saw it on 4 o'clock in the morning on TV, don't believe the hype. Herbs are amazing. They do great things. We fix things that aren't fixable all the time. But they don't usually act like drugs. And I'll give you my favorite case in point. I had a client who came in, and we'd been working on them for a variety of issues. And we helped a little bit, but it was nothing dramatic. And their biggest issue is sleep. And so they happened to have been going to a chiropractor as well. And chiropractor said, oh, I hear you got insomnia. And they were just working on a back or something. It's like, here, I got this great supplement. Guarantee it'll put you to sleep. You're like, all right, I'll buy it. And it was this tiny little bottle. And I'm going to have to buy one of those. I don't think I have that in stock anymore. He took one tiny little thing that night. She was unconscious 12 hours. Slept through her alarm. Woke up. She was like, it was amazing. I haven't slept that long in 20 years. And she brought it in. I was like, I'm looking at the bottle. I was like, I've never heard of this supplement. I've never heard of any of these herbs. I kind of know my herbs pretty well. And So I was like, I started researching, checked out the company, and they had a few of the Latin names and a few common names. And so I wrote the company. I was like, I'm unfamiliar with these. Do you have a Chinese name for these? Can you tell me a little bit about them? They're like, oh, it's all on the website. It was a single page. So I Googled it. I couldn't find anything. So I'm on a few professional groups and so forth. And so I was like, hey, does anybody know what this product is? And everybody's like, I never heard of it. And one guy emailed me properly. He said, I sent it out to a lab and got to test it. And there are 2 pharmaceutical drugs in there in subclinical doses. He's like, it's effective for everybody. I use it all the time, which I was horrified at that he was willing to do that. He knew there were drugs in that, and yet he was still giving it. And so I reported him to the FDA, not the guy, I reported the product to the FDA. So ultimately, as herbalists, as medical professionals of any type, we need to police ourselves. The herbal industry isn't well policed, and so when we find out a product is adulterated, we should turn them into the FDA. And because if we get caught, that looks way worse. So I'd rather say, no, that's illegal. And our herbs are good enough. We can figure it out with good diagnostics. We'll get there. This is probably the worst offender. Pretty much everything you see after midnight that's selling an herbal product is horrifying. Yeah. So I got contacted, really nice gentleman from Jamaica, has a product that does really well. And he was getting it from China. And he hired me as a formulator. And he had a product, he was using 100 milligrams of powdered herbs in I think it was like a little brandy, and they would, you do a shot and you got the herbs. And the amazing results that they were on there. And I asked him, I was like, did you write those yourself? He's like, no, that's what it does. And, you would think they were taking Viagra. I'm not even sure Viagra works that well. So, and he told me a few of the herbs at the company, and it was a secret formula from China, so they wouldn't tell him. It was a drug. And they maybe dusted some herbs over there. And even some of the very powerful herbs that are used for erectile dysfunction, like yohimbe, is actually illegal in Jamaica, which who knew? So it was challenging. Like, herbs can do that. They're going to take a few minutes, or you're going to use some really strong herbs with side effects. And so we really have to watch out. When it's too good to be true, it probably is. And so be careful with those kinds of things, but these in particular.
I'm going to say something about that too. In the same vein, but reverse, like conversely. So when you have people who are freaking out about, we did this study and this does this 100%, it does it, really, really does it. This is the deal. Or you have people who are freaking out that say, no. In this quantity, it's going to kill you. It's going to kill you. It's almost always, like 99.9% of the time, a extract that's been converted, done in the lab, as a whole plant. Almost never do these things happen. It's at the point when we start trying to extract a certain item out and do something with it that consequence would happen, like I said, in a lab setting. And this is important to know, because the only people that do that are somebody who's trying to patent something so they can make money off of it. You can't patent a plant, but you can patent an extract that you move it one molecule for. And so that's why that happens. So it's really important just to get a full scope of literature and conference on why this thing is happening. Because for real, all the times that I've heard somebody say, really, this can cure cancer in children, I'm like, then why are you talking to me? Why aren't you on Good Morning America right now saving millions of children? Like, really? Go do it, please. Like, it's a ridiculous statement, and you have to say those things. Clearly, it's a lie. And that maybe in this 4,000% extract, one time injected on a laboratory mouse, this happened. I don't doubt that. But that's not herbal medicine. That's chemical intervention. And so that's something to always think about, both with the good and the bad.
I was going to say, we're going to come to how things are tested as well. Sure. And I want to define a couple of terms, and it's way easier to say PD or PK. Pharmacodynamics versus can't talk tonight. Pharmacokinetics. So the dynamics is, what does a drug or an herb do for you? It's like, this herb is for lowering blood pressure, or this drug is for. So what does it do for you? And the kinetics, the PK, is how does the body utilize that? How is it processed through the body? Is it excreted through the processing through the liver, the kidney? Is it absorbed through the intestines? Do we inhale it? Do we eat it? Do we inject it? All those are different things. And so there's two things to think about when we think about both herbs and drugs, because we got to see what they're doing together in the body. Is it doing the same thing? Is both the herb and the drug lowering the blood pressure, for instance, and also how they're being utilized by the body? How is it being absorbed and excreted in the body? Because if we're changing the way that happens, or we're competing for the way the body receives that on the receptor sites, we potentially have an issue. And so it's really important that we think about these things. And I'm cheating, I'm looking at my slides. All right. Yeah, I know. I've got 50 slides, and so I was like, I want to talk a little bit about positive herb-drug interactions first. When we talk about positive herb-drug interactions, there's a couple of ways that we can do this. And we've all heard the commercials on TV where if you take this drug, although it may help this, it's going to cause bleeding and death and dismemberment and your head will explode. And we hear that, we're like, yeah, I'm never taking that junk. But the reality is those things don't happen a lot. And they usually happen at the highest dosage levels of those drugs. So the reality is most people start at a really low dose. If it's correctly prescribed, it usually works pretty fast and not a lot of creepy side effects. So one of the things that I think is really magical about doing herbs and drugs together, and this can be good or a bad thing, if somebody's taking a very high dose of a drug and we can use an herb for the same purpose, and I'll use high blood pressure for the same example. The problem with high blood pressure medication, when you take a lot of them in a high dose, fatigue, dizziness, impotence, really lousy, and it can get worse than that. So what would happen if I took an herb that had a different kind of action, that the PK, the kinetics of it, were different, but both of them lowered the blood pressure, so I could reduce the dosage of my high blood pressure meds to the minimum effective dosage. That would be great. The same is true with everything from high blood pressure to high blood sugar, pain meds, so many other things that we can use to use the least amount of the prescription drug to minimize the number of side effects. So I always like to think about that. The other thing, and we'll talk about it in a little bit more detail later, one of the scariest things that we see with the use of antibiotics, and a lot of people are really, antibiotics are bad. I was like, they're saving lives every day. They're overused. They're overused in our food supply. And, it's kind of, you come in, you get a Z-Pack because you got a cold, even though it's a virus, we give it to you anyway. And that's way too common. It's getting less common. But what's happened is we've built up resistance. So those antibiotics are not killing off all the bacteria. And so any of the bacteria survive, they're now immune to that antibiotic. So we get stronger and stronger antibiotics, and those antibiotics have more and more side effects. And at some point, a meteorite might hit us, blah, blah, blah. No, we'll probably die of, antibiotic resistant bacteria. That's the more likely thing that will destroy the world in 100 years. But let's try to avoid that. So we have herbs that, and this is fairly well researched, I won't say there's massive studies, but there's enough studies out there to say, oh yeah, this works, that help prevent bacterial resistance. So that we can take herbs and antibiotics together to great success. And that's brilliant. And it makes the antibiotics work better. And we'll come back to that, I promise, because it's one of my favorite things to talk about. I'm going to save that one for later. So in general, when we talk about those concerns, those medications that we're most concerned with, are those drugs that have a narrow therapeutic margin. That's fancy talk for saying, if you take too much of this drug, you're going to die. If you don't take the drug, you're going to have something really bad happen. High blood pressure, high blood sugar, seizures, those are all bad things. So when we have this narrow therapeutic margin, we have to be really careful. Because if we change the absorption of that drug, or we change the excretion of that drug, bad things happen. So always think about that. If they're like, if the instructions from the pharmacist, if you miss a dose, don't sweat it, just take another one when you get around to it. That means, it's probably pretty safe. And we can even ask, it's like, what happens if I forget one? Go to the hospital. No, you want to be really careful with this stuff. So, oh man, I cannot
Fountain. Sure. Please. High blood sugar, chemo, antivirals, and here, I'll be able to read seizure med. And seizure medications. So these are all things that have a fairly narrow therapeutic margin. High blood pressure is bad. Low blood pressure is bad as well. So
Anything else?
those are the biggies. Yeah, right. Feel free to make those nicer. So with the first two, these can be positive or negative. Because just like I said, we can lower the amount of the prescription drug to where it's still working, but we're not getting the nasty side effects. The same is true of blood sugar. Blood sugar in diabetes is scary because, and sorry, I'm going to jump on a soapbox for a brief second. The American Diabetic Association says that eating too much sugar is not the cause of diabetes, type 2 diabetes, the adult onset. And they say that you can have a little bit of sugar. Obviously, I'm not the only person that thinks that that's an issue. No, that's the American Juvenile Diabetes Association. The main sponsor for the Juvenile Diabetes Association is Dunkin' Donuts. I can't make that shit up. So the reality is they're kind of correct. A failure of the pancreas to produce enough insulin is the cause of type 2 diabetes. It's not too much of a leap to say that the overconsumption of glucose or things that turn into glucose sugar is the reason your pancreas craps out. And there's an aspect of insulin resistance to the cells, yay. But ultimately, eating too much carbohydrates and sugars is a quick way to see type 2 diabetes. So the problem is, as you start medications like metformin, if you continue to not work on exercise, if you continue to not reduce your intake of refined starches and sugars, you're going to go in higher doses. The next thing you know, the insulin resistance will be too much. Then you're injecting insulin. If you're injecting insulin, you just start using more and more, and at some point it stops working. And so that's a big scary thing, because that's a shortening of a life. And the herbs can help dramatically, both in helping with insulin resistance so that your cells are better able to utilize the insulin the body produces, as well as the pancreas, specialized cells in the pancreas that produce the insulin. The herbs can work in both functions. And there's actually one herb that makes it so you don't like sugar. Yeah, that's right. It's yes, Gynostemma sylvestri. It's known as Gumar and the destroyer of sugar. So it has a minor effect on blood sugar and so forth. Its greatest effect is for about 30 minutes to an hour after you drink it. It makes sugar just kind of go, yeah, I don't like that so much. So it doesn't help the addiction to the sugar, but it at least helps the pleasure center where you're like, because seriously, who doesn't think sugar tastes okay? I like it a little bit. So with these, good or bad, chemotherapy, and there's probably more than 2 types of chemotherapy, but we'll keep it simple. We can use chemotherapy for autoimmune disorders. But the main reason we hear about chemotherapy is dealing with cancer. And there's lots of opinions. Is chemo bad? Is radiation bad or good, and so forth? And I would say that's always a personal choice. I think that the best research is out there on treating cancer with chemo, radiation, surgery. But the reality is there's conflicts with all of that and a lot of arguments within it. And so you go to 10 different oncologists, cancer docs, they're all going to give you a different protocol and potential outcomes. And it gets ridiculous. I always send my patients out for a second opinion when it comes to cancer. And it's shocking how different a response we get just from the oncologists and the different opinions. And the reality is, chemo is designed to kill stuff. It destroys the tumors, it's destroying the cancers, and that's the choice we're doing.
if you get too much chemo, it will screw you up and potentially kill you. You don't get enough, and guess what? It doesn't do any good. You just make yourself a little sick. So way too often I see people self-medicating where they're going, well, I'm going to do the chemo, but I'm going to Google herbs that are good for cancer, and I'm going to take all of them. That usually has a poor outcome because, and it's funny, like, yay, you took a year of, 2 semesters of pharmacology and acupuncture school. And the reality is it gets really complex. And even most pharmacists, when we start talking about the P450 receptor site and compete, nobody knows what the heck we're talking about. I actually had to look it up. What does it actually mean when we talk about those? And it's like about the wavelength of the light molecule. And it's like, oh no, forget this. and so the reality is there's an easier way to think about where our risks lie in these drug interactions when we're worried about how that chemotherapy is absorbed into the body as well as excreted by the body. And the excretion part is really important as well because we don't want a toxic buildup of poison. Sour and bitter. Sour and bitter herbs will interfere with absorption and excretion of chemotherapy.
The doctors even will tell you that.
And it was my best example. Actually, I wish they all knew that.
Yeah,
and so we could argue about lots of like other flavored herbs, but those flavors affect our absorption and digestion and elimination of our body. And it's a way easier way, like taste it, see what it does. Open up the pill, taste it. Taste the tincture. Go buy the raw herb and taste it. I'm like, oh no, that's nasty and bitter. Then you shouldn't take it with your chemo. I had I think I was still a student at the time. And it was probably one of my first cancer patients. And she came and she's like, well, I heard herbs and acupuncture can help, and I'm about to start chemo. And I was like, heck yeah. I was like, I know all about this. For whatever reason, I'd researched the crap out of it. And I was like, I've got the perfect formula. And we looked at her tongue. We did a whole evaluation on her. And I was going to give her, I think it was Lue Di Huang one, 6-flavor Romania. And I was like, let me print everything out, take it to your oncologist, make sure he's okay with it. And even though there's a long history of using that with chemotherapy and really supporting the body through that process to maintain the white blood cells, the red blood cells, she comes back 2 weeks later and it's like, oh, no, my oncologist said no. And I'm sitting in my head going, stupid duck, we don't know what. And then she proceeded to explain and said, he said that Shan Zuyu, the Cornelian cherry, and there's sour, and that's going to change the rate. I was like, I don't actually agree with him, but he's not wrong because we put herbs together in formulas that kind of counteract all of that stuff. That's a smart doctor. He left the area. Dang it. And so I really started to explore that idea. And as I started to look at the herbs and look at the research behind it, the ones that always had issues with them, I'd say 90% of them were bitter or sour. So it's way easier for me to tell you, rather than give you a list this long, actually I'll show you the book in a minute, that has all of those. If you just say bitter and sour herbs, stay away from them. They change the PK, the way it's absorbed and excreted. That will make it way safer because no book has all the herbs. There are tens of thousands of herbs when we start to look at the traditions all over the world. And of course, anything that comes from across the ocean must be better than anything that grows in your backyard, right? That's all of our superfoods, all our exotic herbs. We love those. No, we got great herbs here in Florida. When it comes to chemo, I would always say, see a practitioner. Don't self-treat with that. It's hard. I don't even know a lot of practitioners who are good at working with chemotherapy. There's so many things, everything from the constitution of the human in front of you, as well as the dosing schedule, the type of chemo, the add-on meds that are added into if they're doing IV chemotherapy, and then looking at the typing of the cancer, whether it's estrogen sensitive and so forth. It becomes really an intense study to try to figure that junk out. And we're talking somebody's life and success or failure with chemo. A lot of times, though, we see herbs being used after the chemo to kind of repair the damage. And a lot of times I tell people, it's like, you do whatever you feel most comfortable with. I'll clean up whatever mess there is. It's easy. But even with that, I would say for, I don't know, back me up on this one, Renee, at least a month after, you should still be concerned with bitter and sour.
So the thought process is that if you're taking no chemical intervention then it's like we have a field day, we can like really heavy hit with the herbs. But if you are taking chemical intervention, they set you up to have a titration effect to that. And so what that means is long after you stop, the medicine is still circulating in your body and working on it. And then the secondary thought process to that is if you are one of those people, which we all have different digestive systems, we know within our families, people who have to take 4 Tylenol versus 1 Tylenol, if you're one of those people that processes in such a way, then you're going to be having those effects to the good. Like if you're going to poison yourself, you might as well do what's right. We don't want to push it out too fast. So poison yourself appropriately to kill those tumors. It might take longer for you to get it through. And we have a really great success with these herbs and with some foods with cleaning up the mess. And so if I can tell you I can push that medicine all out of you in a 24-hour period, we don't want that to happen if you're in fact on chemical intervention. So we have to be really careful, like 4 or 6 weeks out, like what your kind of digestive system is doing and how you're working with that. And usually not the doctors that you're going to as primary, but the actual hematologist, chemotherapist. Usually they can give you that number and say your kind of chemotherapy and the way that you've been taking it will be fully processed through your body in 1 month. And they usually want to see you 5 weeks later. Yeah, to see that. And so we kind of have a good idea. Plus, if you come to someone who knows how to do it, we can look at your information and tell you. And so that we'll be able to start working on that immediately. So it's very important that you have a really good diet. And by good diet, I mean specific to the medicine you're taking, and that you watch your herbs within that, and we can both help and harm that situation.
So
You want me to rate?
no, oh yeah, actually,
Okay.
you know how to spell checking.
Oh, I don't.
Blue plural.
What do you want, blue pearl or Chai-Hu?
The same thing. So antivirals, and if it's antivirals for herpes, I don't really worry about it. It's like, yeah, it's fine. But when we talk about antivirals like interferon, and we're now on our 3rd generation medications being used for, close enough.
Close enough.
I think we're at least on the 3rd generation of herbs or medications that are being used for hepatitis C. And the interferon was a horrible and occasionally effective medication that took 6 months with really rough side effects. So they were always looking for ways to shorten it and make it better. And now that they've got these new medications, really hepatitis C, I think it's like at a 99% success rate with this new generation of antivirals. And they're curing. And that's not a word that's used a lot in Western medicine. Cure is a pretty strong language.
Here. Like really, they're saying cure a lot.
And so with interferon, and even though these drugs are different categories from that, they're still within the antiviral realm. There was some research done in Japan, and this is for the Chinese practitioners, looking at a formula called minor blue plural. Xiao Chai Hu Tang. And they were doing that in combination with interferon. There was a couple of liver failures. One guy died, bad things. And they're pretty sure it was blupleurum was the culprit. And that's one of the main ingredients in here. It's known as Chai Hu. If you went to the health food store and said, hey, what do you got for a liver cleanse or make my liver healthy or something like that, they would probably hand you things like dandelion, burdock, milk thistle, and blupleurum. Never, 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 never take that with an antiviral. I'm going to err on the side of safe. It was a single study. I think it was like 50 people, but people died, livers failed. That would be bad enough for me to be a little hyper conscious of that. So generally that formula and this herb is super safe, but for some reason, at least with the interferon, there was an issue. So that, if you know nothing else from all of this. The other one is when we look at HIV drugs. And so the HIV drugs are becoming more and more effective with less and less side effects, but there's still side effects sometimes. And it just kind of depends what strain of HIV people have, how far it's advanced, and honestly, their lifestyle. They're frequently looking for herbs, supplements to help them to increase energy, to increase their T cells, and lots of other aspects of that particular issue. It's one you have to be very cautious with. Some of the things that in the past have been talked about as helpful against the HIV virus, cat's claw, una de gato is one of them. It's bitter.
and that can affect the way that drug is processed. And there's no research. There's no research in humans on herb drug interactions. Big goose egg. Most of it's conjecture or test tubes. They screwed with a few mice. And here's where it gets interesting. So research is really important that we isolate chemicals so that we can say chemical A and chemical B are in a body at the same time. What happens? Right? That's really easy. We can look at that from anything from blood work, looking at serum concentrations, or we can see like, oh, look, his liver flew out of his ear. And so we're like, that would be bad. Mice don't follow direction well. They really don't. They're very uncooperative in research studies, and that's kind of where we start with most of our research outside of the test tube. And so what do? They inject them. Who's injecting herbs? Shush. No. So the acupuncturists kind of sort of get to do that. It's iffy. But the reality is, if we're taking them by mouth, it's a very different way an herb and a drug processes through your body, is processed and absorbed and excreted through your liver and kidneys, than if you do it intravenously or intramuscular. So most of our mouse studies, which is about as far as most of them go, sometimes they'll go a little further up the animal chain, are done by injecting the animals with both the herb and the drug. So we don't get an accurate portrayal. They also don't use an herb because herbs don't go through needles really well. They're extracting, and here's where the active constituent, which is usually a chemical, not an herb. And there's a big difference between chemicals and herbs. An herb is made up of 10,000 chemicals that I'm a crazy hippie herbalist, so I have my opinions. I think nature generally does things correctly. And that when we alter the way nature does stuff, like extract a single chemical out, it's going to have a drug-like action, where an herb tends not to have a drug-like action. It tends to be a little bit milder. If you take the sulfur out of broccoli, you might get a way different reaction from that extracted sulfur in the broccoli than you would from eating broccoli. So if we pull a chemical out, we're going to get a different kind of reaction from that. You're like, wow, that's insane. Nobody knows anything. We're guessing, literally. We're guessing a lot of times. I will give you a horrible statistic, and last time I checked, this was still true. There's great research on medications. Although we find some shady stuff from some of the pharmaceutical industry, they do a pretty good job. To get a drug approved by the FDA is expensive and a pain in the ass. There's actually a lot of drugs where two drugs together have been researched. We look at a diuretic with a blood pressure medication. There's even some with 3. There's a couple with 4. There's no research of what 5 or more prescription medications do in your body. My record so far, and I know some of the people in here probably can beat that. She was under 30 years old, wanted to get pregnant. She was on, I think it was 23 or 26 prescription medications. Nobody knows what that was doing in her body. And I can tell you it was making her sick. A lot of times when people check into hospice, where they've got 6 months or less to die, they come in diagnosed with polypharmacy. They've taken a crap ton of prescription meds. They take them off of anything that isn't necessary to sustain life. And a lot of them get better and check out, and not in a box. They check out because they get better. And not to say, again, drugs aren't bad, but they're overprescribed sometimes. And except for a few exceptions, when we look at the antivirals for Hep C, it's amazing. It cures a disease. If you have an infection, you had surgery, antibiotics will stop your infection. You'll live. That's amazing. But I've seen too many times. I have a number of diabetics I have as patients, and they're using insulin, and I yell at them about their diet all the time. And they're like, no, it's okay. I'll just take a little bit more insulin. I can have a pasta dinner tonight. And the reality is, a lot of our drugs are being used for people who choose not to make changes. Somebody walks in here with high blood pressure, I'll encourage them to go to their doctor and get meds for high blood pressure. Whilst they change diet and lifestyle, get their herbs correct, and then they can slowly dose off of that. And in a perfect world, get rid of my herbs too, because that's how that stuff works. Let's correct the problems and use that to keep you safe and alive while you make dietary lifestyle changes to handle things better. I saw a guy the other day, nice older guy in his 70s, and he was complaining of fatigue, declining memory, impotence, and he was on, I think it was 6 or 7 prescription meds and a handful of supplements, like way too many supplements too. And so I started with just like, let's get rid of a few of the supplements. I know that's pretty safe. I could tell quickly what was right, what wasn't. I started working with him on his diet a little bit. And then I started to research his meds. And I was pretty sure I was right on a lot of these. And I always ask people, how long have you been on it? Have you had any side effects? Have they changed the dosage? And have they tried getting you off of those at all? And most of these things he was on for over 5 years. I started with the statin drug, things for cholesterol. And he was eating pretty good. His wife had died about 5 or 6 years ago. And it was at about 5 years ago, they found his cholesterol started to elevate. And this was a thin guy. He was fairly active, exercised every day, ate fairly healthy, and nobody bothered to recheck. And when I looked at his blood work, it's like his cholesterol was great. It was actually a little low. So most of the research is showing now statin drugs increase your risk exponentially of blood sugar issues. Like you're very likely to be diagnosed with diabetes shortly after you go on those, within a year or two. And the other big scary is it seems to be related to dementia. So we're seeing memory loss. And what does it do? It gets rid of the bad fats in your blood, right? The low density lipoproteins, the LDL. This is a big tub of fat. And those drugs, we like to think they're very discriminating, but sometimes they seem to be not as discriminating as we thought they were. So I was like, get off of it for a couple of months, then we'll retest your blood. Let's see what happens. He'd never had any cardiac events or anything like that. Well, lo and behold, his memory got better within a few months. And I had one guy, and there's great doctors and there's not great doctors. There's great herbalists and there's sucky herbalists, good acupuncturists and bad. And I told my patient, I was like, yeah, you're doing great. You've been doing great for a while. You're exercising, eating right. Let's try getting off of those and we'll retest the blood in a couple of months. I was like, but talk to your doctor. He prescribed that medication. We shouldn't be changing the medications of something a doctor prescribed. So he goes to his doctor. He says, I want to try getting off of my statin drug. He goes, I don't think you should do it. And the patient was smart. He insisted. He was like, no, I want to try getting off it, then I want to retest my blood. He's like, fine, we'll retest your blood in a month. So here's what happens. When you stop taking statin drugs for cholesterol, it's kind of like, it's not exactly what happens, but it's close enough. It's like it was holding down all the cholesterol in the liver, and it pulled the cork out, and it floods the body with cholesterol for a little over a month. And so you'll get an abnormally high reading if you test the blood any sooner than 3 months. So I don't know whether this guy actually knew that and he was screwing with his patient, or he was just ignorant of it. And that's very possible. It's like they don't teach a lot of that in med school about how to get off drugs. They don't tell you how to prescribe them correctly. So he got off of those successfully. His blood fats were great, and his memory started to improve. I was having zero success with the impotence. And that was a tough one. He'd been to every urologist. He'd been to everybody for everything. The Viagra couldn't do that, and blah, blah, blah. Went on. So I looked up I forget what anxiety meds he was on, but he was on an anxiety med. And I was like, I didn't know you had anxiety. He goes, I don't know. My doctor said I need to take it. I was like, do you have anxiety? Do you racing hard? And, he's like, no, because I'm taking the med. He was given that when his wife died. And so here's something that's exciting or not exciting to know. When somebody you care about dies, and I don't care whether it's a dog or your significant other or whatever, you're going to be depressed. And if it was the person who took care of you and fed you and all of that, you're probably getting a little anxious because you don't remember how to make pasta. And so the doctor gave him that 5 years ago. And even though he's dating, he has a girlfriend now, Nobody ever took them off. And so I was like, hey, let's start dosing you off of this. No anxiety attacks. He was fine. He's on one med right now. I got him down to 4 supplements that he just like, I want to take these. And the one med was for his hypothyroid. He was on Synthroid. And honestly, that works really well. Not a lot of side effects. He'd been on it for most of his life. I was like, yeah, just stay on it. I'm not worried about that one. So we got him off of most of his medications and he got better. And that's really important. When you need a med, like the Synthroid, you need that med. Like, it's really hard. When your thyroid is tanked, your thyroid's tanked. But those other things, we got to ask, why are you taking it? And sometimes it's very situational, in which case, maybe you don't need to take it anymore. Maybe we should look at counseling first. Maybe we should go for a walk. Maybe we should look at vitamin D levels, which, anybody ever heard of seasonal affective disorder? If you lived up north, low vitamin D levels lead to depression. So you don't need prescription medication, you need some vitamin D. It's a super easy, normal test that they can do. What the heck? It's a, no, that was the antivirals. I don't know how I got off of my crazy tangent. Seizure's tough. It's one of those things, I'm as cautious with seizure medications as I am with chemotherapy. And it's funny, seizures don't normally kill people. It's not like you're going to die if you have a seizure. You might break an arm, you might bite something, you might gag on something. Hopefully you're not operating heavy machinery, it will kill you. But there's lots of different reasons why. And so it could be anything from dehydration to an issue in the brain. So there's tons and tons of reasons why. It's crazy how effective. But with dogs, it's a little easier. They don't drive much. And the crappy part of seizures is when you experiment and you have a seizure. It used to be you lost your license for a couple of years. I heard in Florida it's only 6 months now without a seizure. Yeah, and so it's not like I'm afraid I'm going to hurt somebody. You can be pretty safe, but it would just suck to have somebody lose their driver's license because you were working with herbs. So yes, you can do it. It's definitely a narrow therapeutic margin. You just got to be super cautious. And I hate to say, we have an intern clinic here 3 nights a week where Monday nights we've got acupuncture students from East West College, and Tuesday is Western herb students, and Wednesday is the Chinese herb students. We had a guy, and I don't remember which clinic he came to, and he had seizures. He didn't have health insurance, couldn't afford the medication. Seizure meds are usually pretty freaking expensive, and so we asked lots and lots of questions, and ultimately it comes down to, how come you get seizures? He's like, well, it usually happens when I drink. And we're like, okay, free advice, don't drink, dude. It was really simple, and so sometimes there aren't the right answer. Really just putting glaring in front of people is really effective. And, that's easy for me to say. Drinking is a very socially acceptable thing here in our country. So I'm going to go a little out of order just because I always like to talk about it. I have no idea what time it is. I'm doing good on time. And again, this is kind of one of those, it can be good or bad. And steroids, oh boy, my brain, I'm dyslexic, so I tend to screw things up. If I have sloppy handwriting, you can hide your bad spelling. Steroids are really, if you have a skin disorder where you're tearing the flesh off your skin, if you have an autoimmune disorder that flares up and causes you to be crippled, you know what? The best thing you can do is a steroid. The downside of a steroid is it has horrible long-term side effects. It has horrible short-term side effects. It can be weight gain, weight loss, the moon face that we sometimes see with people who are doing a lot of steroids. Especially with autoimmune disorders, what we see is they start you up on this one dose and they give you a course of treatment where they gradually reduce the dosage of that steroid over a period of time. And what happens is when they get down to that last 5 milligrams of that steroid, they flare back up again. They're back on the high dose of steroids. And it's really just a nasty, nasty roller coaster for a lot of people. And they ward off, but they're challenged by it. there are a number of herbs that are steroidal-like in their action. And I'm going to say, like, because I know I've got some herby folks who are studying, I've got some professionals in here. I'm just going to put this out here. Don't try this at home, kids. We can use licorice and some other herbs in order to extend the life of the steroids so that it's a more gradual stepping down of that last dose, to where, done correctly, they don't get the rebound when they take that last dose. There's a downside to licorice. It will screw up your kidneys. In particular, it throws off your potassium balance, and all of a sudden you get high blood pressure and creepy things with it. So we got to be, whoa, that's weird. Renee, my phone is on crack. No.
Oh my Lord.
Oh, I think it stalled itself, and all right. That's people on Facebook. They're lost. So we have to be careful about our dosing of licorice. That can be very scary. Make sure that we don't use it with people who already have high blood pressure, hypertension, or any kind of kidney issue. That said, you don't need a high dose. A few grams is more than enough. And ideally, you don't use it long-term, you use it short-term. Most of the issues that we've seen with licorice is actually from licorice candy. European licorice candies in particular. They have these super concentrated candies that are really good. And people, if you ever tried Tic Tacs and you kind of got hooked on them and you just kept throwing Tic Tacs back all day long, if you did that with a licorice concentrate candy, you're going to end up in kidney failure, sometimes within a few months. And there's been hospitalizations and kidney failures from that. So candy's bad, whatever. So licorice is good. No, there's actually a Chinese formula that I tend to use for this called Xiaoyao Gansao. So this is actually a formula that has two herbs in it, white peony and licorice. It just happens to be written in Chinese. It's okay. There's some other herbs that can be effective either instead of using the steroids, or again, at that ending dosage. Sarsaparilla. This is specific for skin itching and skin disorders. And so this is a genus and species, the Smilax medica. Yeah. We have a native species here that's a Smilax as well. It's greenbrier Smilax. And it's the wait-a-minute vines. They're climbing up everything. If you ever go in the woods, it's an edible. The tender tips of them are super yummy. If you want to learn like how to find them and eat them, eattheweeds.com is a great source to learn edible plants in Florida. It's green bean. He doesn't talk a lot about medicinal. Our YouTube page has lots of the medicinal use of similar plants. So you at least know this as tufuling. It's greenbrier Smilax. And so that's the root of that plant. That can be used almost as effectively as this. And so we can use that both by itself as a low dose, mild steroidal-like action that doesn't screw up your kidneys, or we can use a little bit higher dose of this and use that in that last 5 or 10 milligrams of the prednisone or similar ones. Does that make sense? I know that was advanced.
No, it's not.
Do what? Steroids?
No,
Or, oh, don't do that. Be super careful. Like
Yeah.
80% of the Chinese herbs
I
have.
was going to say,
Yeah,
let
yeah.
me say something about that. So you just said you're allergic to steroids. So traditional medicinals, this is very super common key brand. You can find it out in Walmart. It's owned by somebody who we know very, very well, who's responsible. Rosemary Gladstar used to own it, and she's the formulator for it. Almost 100% of every single formula they have on the shelf right now has licorice in it. Period. And it's okay. It's not okay, but it's okay. in that small dose because I never therapeutic dose them. Like those teas will never do anything for real. They'll just bend your symptoms, but they won't cure anything. And so that's okay. But when you're anaphylactic or when you're very, very allergic, even a little is too much. So every single one of them, unless it's solely only a single herb, has a sprinkle of licorice in it. Yeah. So unless it's just solid chamomile, if you get one that's like a chamomile lavender blend, then it will have it in there. Yeah, it helps to potentiate and move things through. And so they always sprinkle a little bit in.
So, yeah.
Let's
do all of them.
solid herb. And that's why it's best for you to be in these classes and learn that. So you can walk in here and actually get the plant and know exactly, you can see it, that there's nothing in it and you're getting it.
So I'm going to do a little good herb drug interactions. And now that I've scared everybody to death, although we were talking about the steroids, that's usually a positive herb drug interaction. I threatened to talk about the bacterial resistance. This idea that, you know, if we indiscriminately use antibiotics, and for some people, I hate to say it, I've seen way too many patients who have been on antibiotics for a year or more nonstop. For things like acne, I'd go with the acne, better choice. And that's easy for me to say, but so what I generally do when I have a patient who needs to take antibiotics, and I'm concerned with, because they've either done a lot over the years, or they have a particularly strong bacterial infection, something like MRSA, something like that, where it's like, no, that's some scary crap. I usually give an herb combination at the same time, along with probiotics, to prevent the other side effects that may be happening, like yeast infections and so forth. When we look at the bacteria, it has three ways that it resists the antibiotics. The efflux pump, it's the bilge pump. It's like, oh, let's eat up all these yummy antibiotics, and it just poops it out and never actually affects the bacteria. Biofilm, it's my Klingon cloaking device. It basically puts out slime. You know, do you ever look at like a festering wound? It's like gross and slimy and smelly, and part of that's dead stuff, and part of that is the poop of the bacterium. So we hear about things like that when we talk about shingles. It's a virus in that case. The virus has encapsulated itself on a nerve, and when your immune system tanks, either under periods of a lot of stress or as we get older and work too darn hard, all of a sudden you get this horrible chicken pox ultimately, or it depends on how nice you're being. It's a herpes virus, and so it's way nicer to call it shingles or chicken pox related. But ultimately it's a herpes virus that comes out and it attacks this nerve. And so that's a virus that put out a biofilm to hide it from your immune system for years. So that was, you know, you got chicken pox as a kid, yay! And that materializes in 50 years later. And so these biofilms, and we see that with things like a lot of our more resistant bacteria like MRSA. We see it with things like Lyme disease. The biofilms are a well-known component of the Lyme disease, Lyme disease is weird. It's somewhere between a bacterium and a virus. It's a spirochete, so it kind of falls somewhere in the middle of all that junk. And so, like, it's not this and it's not that, and it's a pain in the butt to treat. And quorum is weird. Like, if you ever worked on a nonprofit board, you know what a quorum is. Or like, you had to come up with an agreement. In the case of working with bacteria, it's how they communicate. And so, sorry, I'm ex-military. So if you ever want to win a battle, break down the lines of communication. You want to screw up the bacteria, make it so they can't talk to each other and warn about the antibiotics that are coming down the pipe. And so it's a way to kind of isolate them and then for the antibiotics to work. If you get really bored, go on PubMed. It's a great place to like go to the original source and look at the research on these things. Put in any one of these terms and the word herb, or choose an herb. And you'll see usually a half a dozen or more research studies, most of them not in the US. Luckily, most of them have been translated into English. And it's unfortunate that the US doesn't do a lot of research in herbal medicine. We find it comes from Israel, Turkey. Interestingly enough, Turkey and Iran do massive amounts of herbal research. And we can argue whether or not they like us or not, but the reality is I don't think they're trying to kill us with herbs. So that pretty good chance they're doing that for their own benefit, or because those are both of those countries have a long tradition of science and research, and particularly natural medicine. Yeah. PubMed. So it's, boy, I am really, I think it's .gov, if I'm not mistaken. And just see what comes up and chase down. You can spend days running down rabbit holes in here. It's really fun. Because you can also put in specific herbs. And so find the Latin name of an herb and any one of these terms, and you'll be able to chase that down. There's a pre-made formula, like, yes, you could research the crap out of it. I don't have that kind of time. What I found is there are a number of herbs that kind of hit all three of those parameters. One of which is Antigraphis peticularis. This is one of the most horrific tasting herbs on the planet. And the Western herbalists have really started to latch on to this. The nice thing, although it's not native here, it's very easy to grow here. And there's actually a formula that's called, well, you can either add that on the end or it's Antigraphis formula. And this combines a couple of additional herbs from the Antigraphis. It adds in dandelion and woad root. Fuganying and Banlangan for the Chinese folks. Sorry, got to translate back and forth. All three of these herbs are strong antimicrobials. And by antimicrobial, it's antibacterial, antiviral, and antifungal. So it's hitting a broader spectrum. Every one of these three herbs is made up of 10,000 chemicals. We're slapping those in on top of the antibiotic. Nothing's going to get resistance to 31,000 different chemicals. It can get resistance to one or two chemicals. So it's really taking a different idea and approach. This is one of the growing areas of research and one of the growing areas to practice to more effectively work on serious resistant bacteria, but also to prevent the bacterial resistance that is becoming a serious issue, like scary. Let's see what other good stuff I got. We said all that good stuff. Yay. I'm sure we've all done this. We've Googled an herb that we heard about. We saw an article. And it says, this herb is good for a cough. And we go, here, I got a cough. Is there only one type of cough or one cause of cough? You know, it could be wet or dry, morning, evening, strong or weak. It could be green, yellow, orange, blood streak, clear, white, you name it. Yeah, right. It could be caused from acid reflux, stress, your blood pressure medications. It could be caused from a lung infection, emphysema, lung cancer. Like, oh my God, the list is endless. That herb doesn't fix all of that, I promise you. And it's funny, one of my favorite herbs to talk about always is Spanish needle by Inzalva. And I was sent down this one little pathway of understanding it because of an anthropologist report I read from the 1700s. It said it was good for a cough. That's why I always like that example. And in reality, it's a very specific type of cough it's used for. In Western medicine, we can go into a walk-in clinic and just like, I don't know, I cut myself, I'm a little worried, I got an infection. Can you clean that up, slap a stitch in and give me an antibiotic? If you have an autoimmune disorder or a cancer, they can't help you. You got to go see a specialist. You get hit by a truck, you need to go to the hospital. So you have a generalist, your GP, your regular MD you see once a year, just kind of make sure you're still alive, weight, blood pressure, order some blood work, and make sure you're okay, and maybe do a little prevention. And so we have all these different tiers of Western medicine. The same is true. Most of you in here are not medical professionals. There's a few. I guarantee if you got the sniffles, a headache, digestive upset, you could walk into CVS and 100% you could select the right medication just over the counter kind of thing without the use of the pharmacy, you could probably select the right stuff for what you got going on. And no medical training. Don't even know how you got it. Maybe your mama told you. Before there was CVS on every corner, everybody knew how to treat a cough and a cold and an infection and sore muscles and insomnia and stress and acid reflux. And we tended to do it with single herbs. It was like you had a little marshmallow root, you had a little chamomile, maybe you do some elderberry for some colds and sniffles, some nettles for your immune system, a histamine response. Every mama knew that. We all forgot. But the reality is there was always somebody else. And whether, depending on where, those people got fancier. They put herbs together. They asked you questions. They looked at your tongue and your pulse. And sometimes it was a physical element, sometimes a spiritual element that they would go after. And so it was combinations of herbs that were used, both internally and externally. And there was even preparation. Sometimes you had to burn it first and all of this. And yet, when we try to understand that from the outside without knowing the culture, the language, and the traditions, we just go, oh, look, that guy's got a cough. I gave him that herb. And we don't know what happened prior to that. And so we miss the boat on a lot of those things that we read. And you almost have to be immersed in the culture to understand it properly. We're lucky in Chinese medicine. They wrote that junk down and they kept the Europeans out. You know, go back to your history books. They were only allowed into 3 port towns for a very long time on the Yangtze River. And so, like, cool, that junk was preserved. It even survived the communists and everybody else in there. And so that was still there. Even in India, a place that wrote all that junk down, British burned that stuff. They destroyed a lot of that. And luckily, some of it was preserved, some of it was oral tradition. And when we look at some of the native cultures, luckily South America, those oral traditions are very strong. A lot of those people down there in places like Peru and Ecuador, those traditions are still preserved and passed on. But here, our First Nation people in North America didn't fare quite as well. And there's been a loss of a lot of that culture. There's still some of it that's surviving, but less and less of it's available to us anymore. It's funny. Renee and I both have had the pleasure of working with a few people that, especially in the US, Canada, I don't know as well, but they're going outside the tribe now because there's not enough people left in the tribe who have an interest in learning those traditional medicines. So there is a great disparity in the native culture. Some people are like, no, you have to be native blood in order to be taught these things. And they're like, yeah, but I got nobody to teach. So I don't want the knowledge to leave. And so they're actually going outside and teaching people who are not native blood. They're teaching some of those traditions and they're being selective, which is nice. But it's a real issue to understand these things properly within their cultural context and their energetic system. It's funny. One of the things it's my purpose in life is to teach all traditional medicine, whether it's Ayurvedic, Chinese, First Nation people, whatever. They all have a diagnostic system. They use different funny words to say hot and cold, wet and dry, deficient and excess. Chinese say yin, yang, qi, all that kind of stuff. Ayurvedic talks about the digestive fire, the agony, and things like that. And if you went down to South America, they would have their own way of describing it. They're all saying the same thing. And that's the way we describe our food. That's the way we prescribe our medicine, talk about our herbal medicines. And my newest exciting thing, sorry, we don't have time for that. It's a way longer thing. Prescription drugs have energetics. Prescription drugs are heating or cooling and reducing and so forth. And we can start to be predictive of potential side effects based on those ideas. And for those of you, I don't know, how many of Chinese medicine are in school for something? Yeah, I know you are. All right, okay, good. We got a couple made it. So a red tongue means heat and a pale tongue means cold. And I would argue that antibiotics are cold. So the person with a red tongue probably won't have an adverse reaction to it. Person with a pale tongue, you better warm them up before they start taking that. And you can prevent the more serious side effects that we see with things like Levaquin, when tendons are rupturing and all kinds of fun crap happens from that. Levaquin's starting to become almost a commonly used prescription antibiotic, and that's kind of scary. That was enough of that. So, adulterants. So prescription drugs would beat up on that a little bit in the front end. That they are often, not often, they're occasionally adulterated. Lead, arsenic, pesticides, that's against the law for those to be in any of your herbal medicine to significant amounts. Well, guess what? Sometimes they are. The Chinese and Ayurvedic herbs are notorious for it. There's probably 15 or 20 companies that I would consider safe, that I know they're doing third-party testing for heavy metals and pesticides. Like, oh no, they've been doing it for 1,000 years. That would be an issue because they used lead back then. And that's on their machinery and their grinding wheels and all of that. I want the new factory. So we should be able to ask. So whether you're buying from a company directly, if you're a professional and you're buying it wholesale, don't work with a company unless you, and I always say this, it's my running joke to my students. It's like, call them up and say, hey, I want to open an account with you, but before I do, I'd like to see the C of A. And if they go, what? Just hang up. Certificate of analysis. That is and although most companies do it in-house, I feel better about it when it's third-party testing. We get kratom here. And so almost everybody I've ever seen selling kratom from Indonesia says, no, it's tested, see? And it's from Indonesia. I don't feel comfortable with that. I don't know what bribe they paid somebody to just box that stuff up. So you send it out to a lab, it's $50. That $50 will tell you about bacteria, yeast, and mold. You got to pay almost $500 to get tested for pesticides and heavy metals. It's a little pricier. And you got to do that periodically just to play it safe. So if they don't have a certificate of analysis for their products, don't work with it. And I would add to that, I really question my herbs out there, Chinese. Work with legit companies. I really like more and more herbal companies, both in the US and from China and India and so forth. They're putting their certificate of analysis on their website for you to look for. You don't even have to ask. You just go on there and go, oh, look, that was from last year. I'm good with that. So it's a serious issue that we need to ask questions about. Anybody here a wildcrafter? You go out and pick plants and herbs and nosh out of the weeds. All right, cool. So super fun, you should do some kind of training with somebody. Green bean's a great place to start. So some plants look like others. For some of you went out to a field, you'll go, green plants good. No, the reality is leaf different, poison, not poison. And we have poisonous plants here. So there are people that are called wildcrafters who go out and they like, I'm not sure how they made that mistake, but they did. And so all of a sudden there was a lot of germ in the supply that we had a bunch of major issues with some liver issues, elevated liver enzymes. And so that was kind of before we started doing the testing as an industry. So nowadays they should be testing for PAs and AAs, aristologic alkaloids and pylonazidic alkaloids. A number of plants have those in there in varying amounts. The PAs are probably the biggest issue. It's a limited number of plants that have AAs, and it's easier. AA and PAs easier than the pylonazidic, and more about plants as more detailed monographs and research comes out. We're finding a few plants. The newest one that came out, I think, a year or so ago, boneset. It's a Western herb that's very common to use for colds and flu. Doesn't have a lot of PAs in it, but there's PAs in there. And I know I've seen formulas where people were taking that every day for a really long time. The potential for harm to the liver, potential to harm for a pregnant woman or for a young baby is very real, especially long-term use. So we got to pay attention to those things. And even with the comfrey, huge debate in the industry. I think don't use it internally. Why risk it? There's other great herbs that we can use. A lot of people drink it every day. If you grew up in South Carolina, Georgia, North Carolina, you drank comfrey tea at the end of dinner because it was a carminative. It helped with your digestion. Very common Appalachian herb for that. The problem is we don't have research studies from 100 years ago of what happens if you drank something every day for 40 years. And people didn't live quite as long as they used to. I don't know whether it was too much comfrey and so forth. So there's one herbalist I see pretty regularly, and we we differ on the use of comfrey. There's a long tradition of eating it. I don't think you should eat it. So every time I walk up to her, she grabs up a comfrey leaf and starts chewing on it, and I'm fine. I'll show you. See, and I think I just killed myself. I spit it out. No. So short-term use, it's fine. Long-term use, I never recommend the PAs. We have to be very, very careful with those. If you're working with clients, always make sure if you're going to start making those kinds of decisions, you should do it with your patient's consent. That you're letting them know that there's a higher risk. If you're doing a surgery or chemotherapy that may kill you, your patient needs to agree to that kind of a treatment. So we should do the same if we're running with something that's a little bit squirrelier. We talked about those. All right. How many people have read that herbs are bad? Come on, don't lie. I see it all the time. So the media really seems to have issues, and I hate to say it, Consumer Reports, wonderful magazine. I'm going to go buy a refrigerator. I want to read Consumer Reports. They don't like us, and I don't know why. That they are no advertisements. They're usually facts, facts, facts. They're doing the research. Not with herbs. It's some serious yellow journalism there, and they really beat up on us. So they'll have 7 deadly herbs on the front cover, and then the next edition, after we beat the crap out of it, soon they're like, retraction, sorry, we were wrong, in this little microscopic print on the last page. And we see that a lot in the media. All of the media tends to grab hold of something and blow it out of proportion. And so we get a lot of misinformation and lousy research with all of it. So I caution against overemphasis. If you see something that's terrible, like, oh my God, I was taking that supplement and they just said it killed 1 million people. There's a wonderful source, the American Botanical Council, ABC. Their website is herbalgram.org. .org or .com, I forget. Mark Blumenthal is the president of that. He has more scientists, MD, herbalists, naturopaths, you name it. If they got initials, they're on their board of directors. And every time there's something horrific that comes out about herbal medicine, they'll do their homework and they will either have a counter statement to it or going, yeah, that company screwed up. They don't have a problem calling us out. There was a recent thing, anybody's like a year or so ago, New York City, the district attorney went after a bunch of herbal companies that said it's all lies, it's nothing but crap in there, and major companies that we were looking at for that. And everybody's like, wait a second. So they were doing DNA testing on these herbal supplements. They were extracts. There's no DNA in an extract. If you took a plant and said, here, go test this, there's DNA in there, right? You spit, there's DNA in your spit. Once you extract it and alter that chemistry of that, there's no DNA. And a bunch of scientists tried to tell them that. It was easier and cheaper for the companies to change their products. And that's a sad thing, that they were so intimidated by the district attorney in the state of New York. And there was so much negative press on that they had to just back down and go, sorry, you guys are idiots, but we'll do whatever you say. We'll change our labels. They pulled their products, redid it.
They have to do testing that has nothing to do with their product.
It says you got to do it, so you do it. And it's cheaper, it's easier. Don't argue with the government. You'll lose every time. There's a lot of companies out there, and I am not on the payroll for any company. Obviously, we sell stuff out here. There's companies where I've been to their farm and looked at their farm and looked at their soil and had lunch in their gardens. And I've been to their factories and I take classes from their quality control guy, and they show me the crap that comes in sometimes. And it's always makes me feel better, because I can do an herb walk in our back alley here and find all kinds of medicine I could harvest for you. And hell, I'll eat it. Probably don't want to sell it or make medicine out of it. So there's I'm sorry, this one's for the Chinese folks again. There's one company, Legendary, who does the powders. They now have like the Google Maps. they'll send links to every farm that they got their products from before they process it. So you can literally zoom in and like be a spy and say, oh, look, it's right next to the sewer. You know, but that's reality. You know, sewers make great fertilizer, and, you know, so we have to be suspect of those things. And it's nice when we can get that level of detail, where we can literally look at the farm, or we can go out there and visit it if you're like in the Carolinas or something like that. Well, yeah. But, you know, China's slow. So I want to talk about at least 2 herbs, and I might make it to a third because I know I'm running out of time. Yes. Sorry for those people I creep out when I stare at the camera. So St. John's Wort. St. John's Wort, I know in your head you all went, I know St. John's Wort, it's for depression. No, it's not. The Greeks wrote about St. John's Wort, it's for melancholia. And actually it's mediocre for that at best. It is probably one of the best researched herbs on the planet. And yet during the 70s, 80s, we were like, it's for depression. And we sold it that way. It's marketing, and marketing is always amazing. And what we had was the pharmaceutical industry said, fine, let's do a study. And whatever Lipitor, or not Lipitor, sorry, whatever the antidepressant SSRI of the day was, they tested it against hypericin, which is one of the unique chemicals in St. John's Wort, and it failed, did nothing. And then we were, wait, we didn't say hypericin was anything, we want the herb. And so they went, and then they tested the herb against moderate to severe depression, which nothing works for that. Honestly, the meds don't work particularly well for that. So it failed in that study. There's been one, since the 70s, there's been one study that was appropriate for mild to moderate depression against SSRIs. It actually did better than the SSRIs, just by a little bit, not a whole lot. And I don't even think it's very good for that. But the reality is it will interfere with the receptor sites of about 50% of all prescription and over-the-counter medications, to include birth control, blood thinners, high blood pressure meds. Yeah, those are the ones I can think of. 50% of the most common prescription drugs. I personally will never give internally St. John's Wort with anybody on prescription medications. That's just me. I have way more effective herbs for melancholia, depression, and so forth. So as a general rule, just stay the heck away from it. And there's conflicting research all over the place. There's a great conference, AHG conference, I think, or Medicines of the Earth. And this guy from England came, and he was like, if you came here to learn about how some herb does something, you're in the wrong place. And he stood up for 2 hours. He ranted about St. John's Wort, and all, like, he basically quoted every research study that contradicted every other research study. He was like, no, it helps with chemotherapy and the treatment of cancer. He's like, but wait, here's 5 studies that says it's terrible, that it interferes. So it was like, oh my God, just stay the heck away from it. It's easy. That said, and here's your free herbal advice for the night. It is one of my most effective herbs topically for anything nervy. And I say it that vaguely because I don't care whether it's diabetic neuropathy from chemotherapy, a severed nerve from a surgery. I don't care. Use it for nervy stuff. Externally, there's oil extractions of St. John's Wort that are ridiculously effective. With most diabetic neuropathy, 2 to 3 weeks of daily application, we start to see benefits from it. And you're not at risk with topical application of the herb drug interactions you are with internal. That PK, right? How it processes through the body, local versus systemic. Yep. Yes. I with sciatic nerve, like if it's going down the side or the back of the leg, I do it on the spine and the distally as well. Yeah.
And one more caution that kind of goes to that, don't forget, is that when you purchase your oils out and you're not making them yourself, and when you're making them yourself, if the oil is not in fact red, you are getting ripped off.
Yeah.
So you open a herb bottle of oil, it better be red.
Don't say people's names.
Why? They should be proud. They should be proud.
Oh.
It's okay. What was your question?
You have your new order of.
No, it hasn't come in yet.
I was gonna say you want me to look.
You can check, but I think they're still out, which pisses us off because it's a pain to try to go and find it this time of year. I think we honestly bought them out. You have to harvest it when it first starts to, the flower buds start to form is the ideal time. And there was a St. John's wort, and there's been a blight the last few years in the major growing areas of St. John's wort. So only a few companies have these coveted like valleys where it grows. And it's wintertime. So whatever they made was whatever they have. And so we've been searching around for them. Yeah, while you were up.
Yeah. Yeah. So it doesn't grow here in a way. Yeah, we have some other ones that we cannot prove whether or not they work correctly. We Florida St. John's works, but we don't have any research on it.
Yeah. Oh, I thought I heard a question.
Well, we have many, 100%. The time it's picked, the time of day it's picked, the time of week it's picked, the time of month it's picked, the time of year it's picked, the soil conditions and the exposure to sun all change chemical constituents starting at 10,000 tons.
Sadly, it's all true.
Yeah, come let's go.
So, and I know our time is short, and there's a couple of things that I just like to, we covered a lot of crap, and I want to leave you with some just bullet points of like, I don't want anybody to have a negative reaction to an herb. I want you to have success with it. I don't want, like, if somebody dies, has a seizure, screws up their cancer, I look bad as does every herbalist in the country. So quality control is key. It's always tough when we're taking, a couple medications and over the counter, you eat all over the place, go through a drive-through, go to, street food, and then we also take some food or some herbs. Sometimes we don't know what the adverse reaction is. Was it a food drug, food herb, bad food, dehydrated, didn't drink enough water that day? It's hard when you have one reaction. It's also scary to say, well, let's see, I didn't sleep, I pooped myself, and I was puking for 3 hours. I think I'll try that again and see whether it was an herb or not. That's not very nice. I've had people who do that. They're like, oh, it wasn't the herb, good. I was like, so, re-challenging is challenging. So, sometimes we have to just go, maybe you were sensitive to that herb, but anybody can be sensitive. Because there's not a lot of research, because we don't really know how all of this stuff works together in your belly and the way it's processed, I love to shoot for a separation of 4 hours between your herbs and your drugs. I'll take what I can get, but I don't know, I take too many herbs. I'm like, I throw my 2 handfuls of supplements in. Okay, I'm not on any prescription meds. But the reality is, can you imagine if I did 4 or 5 prescription meds, threw those back, swigged them down with a cup of coffee, 10,000 chemicals in that cup of coffee. Maybe I got some food to be, then I take 2 handfuls of supplements. Nobody knows what that does. The reality is a lot of people do that. They're fine. So trying to separate that as much as you can, so at least it's not in your stomach acid at the exact same moment, get mixed up into some weird science experiment. It's preferable to get a little bit of time in between those. And the greater the amount of time, the less likely you are to have a reaction. The other thing I want you to remember, if you're taking an herb and a drug for the same reason, you need to pay attention because your herbs work. They do stuff, like no ands, ifs, or buts. So if you're taking a drug for your high blood pressure and it's doing a decent job, and then you go, yeah, but I hear this is good for high blood pressure. Now you got low blood pressure. And that's an adverse event. So like for like can be good or bad. It just depends on how you utilize that. Remember those things, that narrow therapeutic margin, to be extra cautious with those. And if you got a real medical condition, work with a doctor and an herbalist. And that herbalist can be, there's some chiropractors who really know what they're doing with herbs, acupuncturists, half their training's in herby stuff. There's crazy herbalists that we're cranking out and putting out there. Somebody other than Dr. Google should be the one who's reviewing things for serious medical crap. Thank you.
And they will locate somebody who's knowledgeable in your area, and it's not something that's biased, it's something that is peer reviewed. Like we will yank their crap and say, we'll call them on their bad herbalism is my point. And that's the only governing board that we have in the United States of America. So if we say that they're a registered herbalist and that we're putting our stamp on them, then we mean it because it's making us look bad if we don't. And so that's how you can find the one in your area, the American Herbalist Guild.
And that's always the hard part. You can be a mail order herbalist, or you can go to major 4-year college kind of herbalist. So I always ask people like, wait, where'd you learn this crap? I read a book, you know.
It's super common. Just I took a course.
For a week.
You know, and to become your registered herbalist, you not only have to be peer-reviewed, but you have to be out of education a minimum of 4 years in solo practice with proof of those cases, so that we know that they haven't harmed anybody in the past 5 years.
And you know, and sorry, the couple of things I probably forgot to mention. Think about where you buy your herbs. There are a number of good herb shops in the area. There's some great health food stores. You know, Rolling Oats is right down the street. Well, Publix is not a good herb shop. Nor do they know a whole heck of a lot about supplements. And sorry, Publix, we go there all the time. But
it sits on the shelf.
And they usually buy in the cheap product rather than the best product. And it's funny, you would say, like, you know, anybody can get a job at Rolling Oats, and you know, they do have some discrimination. You really have to, if you're buying supplements in particular, from a health food store, supplement company, things like that, start to ask the person who's helping you hard questions, like, what kind of training have you got? And I'm going to beat up on Kim. She may still be online. You know, Kim graduated from our program here. She's been working at the supplement aisle at Rolling Oats for probably 8 years and does every training that, and admittedly, just like a lot of the MDs get training from the reps, she gets a lot of her training from the reps. And so they're a little biased, just like any company who's selling a product, they're a little biased in favor of their product. But, you know, she's done our program. She's taken, I think she did a couple of other programs as well. She kind of knows stuff. And so that's nice, as opposed to maybe that guy just got moved over from produce to help out stocking the shelves, and you stopped and said, what should I do for, you know, my rare weird disease? And you're like, I don't know, here, take this. And you have no idea. So make sure you're getting good sound advice no matter where you're going.
I'm going to point out something real quick about what Wort just said. First of all, he said they were discriminatory. And what he didn't mean they discriminate.
They're not racist.
He meant that they're very choosy upon who they pick. So I needed to refer that because I heard a few voices in the audience. But then the second thing was he just used Kim as an example. This is a nearby store called Rolling Oats. There's 4 of our students there. They're in all different departments. So one of them,
get the guy from produce.
One of them that's making your food. One of them that's making your food is one of them. One of them that's in produce is one of them. One of them that's the cashier that came out of the middle of the aisle, and the bulk is one of them. And then Kim's over in the supplement area. So they really do try to choose people who believe in what they're doing. It's a family business. So that versus Publix, who's trying very hard to do a good job, or Walmart, who's trying to get you really inexpensive products, all of that's very wonderful. But just the act of that bulk movement around of it makes it so then it's a year old when it gets to you with your expiration date on it. Versus Rolling Oats sells out and you go there to get it and it's not there. At least you know it's fresh when you do, because they're selling out so completely. And so it's just something to think about, a smaller local company versus not.
Well, I know we covered way too much information. For some of you, it's overwhelming. Some of you have been here before for this exact class. I love it. And you know, some of you have gotten snippets or got medically stuff in your background. And the fact that any of you are here watching online means you actually give a crap, and you're trying to do it right. And so I appreciate that. And I would encourage you, like, this is not the end all, but I will say as a clinician, literally sour and bitter, stay away from those narrow therapeutic margins, separate it as best you can. And the reality is, I don't think I've had a lot of adverse, scary reactions to herbs and drugs together. And most of my patients are on prescription medications.
And most of them are critical, really weird things.
Yeah, I get all the weird stuff. It's great. But the reality is, when you're using good quality herbs, when you're using herbs, not extracts, it's like eating food with a little extra pizzazz. You eat too much of the wrong food, you poop yourself, you know? And so you eat too much of the wrong herb, same outcome, literally. And so we have to be careful no matter what we're doing. And we have to research the medications. And I always say, be your own advocate, quiz your pharmacist. They're usually pretty smart. And they'll say, oh, let's double check and look for contraindications for both herbs and the drugs themselves. The drug-drug interactions is a very real issue and can be life-threatening. Way too often, that's what I find it is. I don't need to treat them. I need to just tell them, like, that's a side effect. You're being overdosed on a particular medication. Go talk to your doctor. I love it when I don't give people herbs. So, like, you guys have already started the path of trying to be safe and being responsible with your stuff. And check all of your resources. Oh, I didn't pimp out my favorite book. Yes. Hi, camera. Wow. Oh, it's backwards. Read that. It's on our webpage. So, and I'll pass this around. They come out with a new edition every couple of years. Brinker, herb-drug interactions. Francis Brinker, he's a naturopathic physician, a real one, not a mail order one. And he went and did the homework. I said there's not a lot of research. Every statement in there is backed up with research that you can follow the link to that. It's not a lot of Chinese medicine, but many of our Chinese herbs are actually Western herbs with cool Chinese names, or the same genus, if not the same species. So that is my go-to when I have questions. But the really cool part of this, and it's why everybody ought to have it, and no, he's not my, actually, I've been on panels with him before, but that's besides the point. The appendix at the back has a number of different aspects in there. I need more B3, they'll give you all the herbs that are high in B3. It also is something I've begged for forever, the nutritional deficiencies caused by prescription drugs. And then talks about the herbs or the supplements that you can use. If you're on long-term acid reducing medications, on a PPI for acid reflux, you're not going to absorb minerals anymore. End of story. There is a few research studies on PPIs for over 1 year. There's zero past that. And people are put on acid reflux meds for life. And it's really hard to get off of them. There's a rebound effect. So that's just horrendous and painful. And so guess what? You need minerals. Otherwise, you end up with all kinds of weird crap that happens 5 and 10 years later. Like birth control, that depletes certain nutrition, vitamin B12 in particular. The statin drugs deplete CoQ10 and other things. And it's in the book. Yes, it's all in the book. And so that is a wonderful resource, whether you're a medical practitioner or not, to start to go, hey, if you're going to take that, you're going to be on it, you need to take these 2 or 3 supplements in order to counteract the, I would say, almost guaranteed side effects long term. Short term, yeah, not a big deal. Questions, thoughts? No, it's too late on a Friday night. Where's my beer? Yes. Yes. Yeah, not even a question. Yeah, there's a few, like, you don't even have to see me for me to say, like, no, you should be taking CoQ10.
100% that you will eventually develop something that's because of
the other one is if you're taking antibiotics, take a probiotic, and if you've taken a lot of antibiotics, take a lot of probiotics and change brands every couple of boxes. Yeah. No, so if I would
therapeutic thing and it causes problems.
Like, if you're a healthy person, you've never taken an antibiotic in your life, you're a vaginal birth, like, nah, my digestion's good. Eating fermented foods will help to maintain your healthy digestion. If you took a drug, you need a drug-like response to counteract its side effects. And fermented food isn't going to cut the mustard.
And fermented food isn't yogurt. Yogurt can be fermented, but the yogurts usually always have sugar in them. And if they have even 1 gram of sugar in them, they're counteracting what you're doing. They're growing the bad bacteria.
Yeah.
You had a question.
Kombucha is horrifying.
And I love kombucha.
Like drinking a soda.
Really?
Not quite that bad, but it's darn near.
It's worth it.
It's yummy.
It's better than Coca-Cola.
Almost all of them have over 20% of sugar. And the the 22 gram you see right there. So no, absolutely not.
We've
No. Well, you couldn't drink the right amount to be therapeutic. So like what's in a little capsule, you'd have to then drink 6 or 7 or 8 all day.
But it's
And
too much
by
sugar.
that's drinking nothing but juice at that point. So it's good to maintain if it doesn't have sugar, because if it has the sugar in it, then you're going to perpetuate it.
Even 1 gram.
My opinion is that 0 sugar should be given into your gut if you're working with some kind of gut issue like candida.
And it's funny. So I have digestive issues.
No
It's a gift-
carbohydrates at all.
it's a gift to the military. And I love sugar. Like seriously, who the hell doesn't, right? And I know that if I eat the wrong stuff, whether that's a piece of cake or honestly a banana, it's or a piece of bread, that's going to affect my digestion. I love kombucha. I love the kombucha. Like Mother Kombucha, love his stuff. And many other ones, I enjoy them all. They affect me like a banana or a piece of cake.
Not as like a
And
medicine.
most people that I have met, it does as well. And they stop it. Like literally, that's usually the worst thing that they're doing because they're doing everything else perfect. Because people like kombucha, like no, healthy people
And they
drink
don't
that, right?
understand. And what's in your diet? And it's not.
So in the same way that I would consider having a piece of cake a treat, I think kombucha is a wonderful treat.
And that's why it's like soda.
Yeah.
So if you had just plain soda the way it used to be made that didn't have the chemicals in it, it would be exactly the same thing. But you might as well just eat a Snickers bar as your treat. And that's not gut health.
And I've tried a lot of them. They're all super yummy. I haven't found them. Any of them are kind.
So in terms of picking out the right probiotic, do you recommend?
I have, my opinion is that you trust that you're really very picky about the additive, like the inert ingredients. You're picky about that, like the things that aren't supposed to be affecting you, like the capsule. Like you look and it says, no this, no this, no this, no this on it, because they add other things into that can sabotage you, and that you switch them all the time.
And I'll add to that. So there's huge debate in the industry of like what strains, how
4
many,
billion, 8 billion.
room temperature stable, refrigerated. So here, I'll give you a couple of them. And I usually say, make sure there's a bunch and at least 3, I prefer 5 different strains. But the research is being done and has been done, specific strains for specific issues. And even though Saccharomyces is actually a yeast, not a bacteria, like Saccharomyces is specific for loose stools. And so we can get that precise. And soil bacteria versus milk bacteria, they're like, oh my God, who's got time to do all that research? So I actually find every company has their own proprietary strains. And so literally changing brands, because there's 10,000 different kinds of critters in your gut. You don't know which one you're missing unless you spend $500,000 for a poop test, and even then it's a little iffy. I find it fascinating because we've all bought the really expensive $60, $70 bottles in the refrigerated section. I've gone through so many different probiotic companies and distributors. One company sent them to me refrigerated with ice packs.
Which means that the delivery mechanisms on the ones that are going into the refrigerator means they weren't refrigerated. That means they're dead. Some of them are dead. At least some of it is dead. But then the other thing is,
so the research has actually shown that the dead ones still seem to have benefit.
that's what I was going to say. That
And I don't know why, but
for
it does.
me, especially with the cancer clients or anybody who's like a special population, somebody who's been very sick for whatever you want to say, the refrigerator ones usually upset their stomach, like they're really causing a lot of bubbles and movement. They're doing
They're
their
too
job.
strong sometimes.
Right, so they're upsetting their stomach. So when I get one that I can take handfuls of and my stomach doesn't get upset, it makes me super excited because I'm adding extra to it, but I don't feel sick. And it may be doing your job, but you don't want a self-induced health crisis either.
Yeah.
So just really being consistent about thinking about how your gut is reacting. And that was a good question too, because it's a direct link to our nervous system. We have a nervous system in our gut and our endocrine system. So if our gut's not working, everything that we talked about tonight is irrelevant because we don't know how much we're actually getting, what it's doing, where it's going. Yeah.
When you talk about sweet
Yeah.
and sour, I throw, to make it the gnarly stuff palatable, I throw lemon.
Yeah.
You like the
every
sour.
day.
Yeah.
It gets past,
Yeah.
you know, and even if it's just numbing the rest
So
of my
at least in one
But
part
is
of your
that
body,
one-
so at least in one part of your body, it's either driving it towards that or pushing it out of.
It actually also
Period.
makes your minerals more bioavailable.
So it works. See, that's why we're saying, but the fact that,
Right.
so the fact that you don't know means that then if you're taking a handful of supplements and of this and of that, some of them are being peed right out, some of them are storing in an area. This thing is doing that. Kind of how we get like tummy aches when we eat multivitamins, like in a handful. Sometimes you get a stomach dysfunction.
When I was in Ecuador, I did a 12-part TV series down in Ecuador. And the very first place I stopped, we got all these herbs. We harvested them for now. We're filming them and we're mashing them up. And he was going to beat me with them and stuff. And so we picked all these herbs and they had a couple of limes sitting on the corner. And we went through and we're like, what's with the limes? And so this guy doesn't have electricity, no education, no internet, doesn't have a cell phone. And so he starts squeezing them into the bucket where we put all the herbs. He's like, makes the medicine work better. They did that for 10,000 years. And they don't know, well, the citric acid works to make the, chelate the minerals and put them into solution to increase. He didn't know any of that crap. He just knows makes the medicine work better. So he didn't know any of that crap. Just makes the medicine work better.
So let's clarify that real quick. If you're not doing sense in medicine, then you're okay, and it might be helping. If it's just herbs that you're doing it to.
Yeah.
But if you're taking it with your medicine, and the other thing is you might end up taking, it's again the dosing, because you don't know how your body's uptaking it, you might end up taking less if it starts to feel like as if, but then
Somebody else had a question.
yeah, was there another question?
Wow, come on, where's my brain salt? Thank you all for giving up your Friday evening and hanging out with us. Thank you all up there. Yay. If anybody wants more stuff or got a question you don't want to shout out to the gang,
There's
We'll
a
hang out
sign
for a
up
few
sheet
minutes.
on the
Oh,
on the table if you want emails about upcoming classes. There's also flyers you can grab on the way out that's got like the scheduling on it for the next couple weeks. At
come
least.
to more free classes, come to Herb School, check us out on YouTube, and there's good stuff. Oh yes, we do
If
have
it's in your
them.
textbook, we
Yeah.
have it. Yeah.
And if you're really crazy, join the American Herbalist Guild, and they've got wealth of information. A few of them are ours. Yay. That's
We got
all on there.
webinars on the aging if you're an animal one. Like this.
Thank you all for coming.
So Bob, all at once.
Huh?
I said so Bob, and then I paused and said all at once. The internet did its special thing, so
Yes.
everything shut down. So that's what that was, and I couldn't get it back on.
Okay.
And